when you work with creation and you work with the way God ordered nature, it's an amazing, overwhelming abundance where when God says to Adam, you can till and keep the garden, you can work and bring everything within your work to greater perfection and greater fruitfulness and damage nothing.
G'day everyone and welcome to the Thomas More Center channel. My name is Mark Makievetsky and today it's my pleasure to be interviewing Jason Craig. Jason runs a small dairy farm in North Carolina, is the founding editor of Sword and Spade magazine, and the author of several books including The Liturgy of the Land and Leaving Boyhood Behind. Jason, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
It's great to have you. So starting off with an interesting question. You claim that your family invented bourbon, so please fill us in.
Well, the way it's amazing how often that's the first question. So it's just Catholics in their minds. That's how they work. The story was I was at a family reunion and I had an aunt, very learned and diligently studying our ancestry. And this is sort of how I know there's some legitimacy to it. She told me with some embarrassment that, because she's sort of post-Puritan American Protestant, with some embarrassment that our ancestor Elijah Craig invented the bourbon that's now called Elijah Craig, and that is the father of bourbons. At which point, as a newly minted Catholic, I drove to the liquor store immediately and bought some, and been a devotee ever since. But it turned, the stories of how he invented it, and they vary on, whether it's believable or legend or good kind of legend or bad. But he was an illegal Baptist preacher, I believe in Virginia, when you had to be licensed by the state to preach, and it basically the Church of England. And he was an illegal Anabaptist preacher who made a sideline hustle of making bourbon.
You must be the second person I've encountered that has some connection to a famous beverage, because I was in India in 2005, found myself on a tea plantation with the granddaughter, potentially the great granddaughter of Earl Grey. So we were drinking tea with a potential tea heiress, but apparently he sold out to Twinings before she inherited. So there you go,
yeah.
bourbon and tea.
Yeah, when I went to the liquor store, the person behind the counter said, "I just found out this is my ancestor." They said, "Oh, you probably have a college fund somewhere." And I said, "That's unlikely once the corporations get a hold of it."
Yeah, that's a shame. So, Jason, you grew up in suburbia, but then eventually you found yourself pursuing the rural life. And so I'm just wondering what kind of difficulties you encountered when you made that transition and what advice you'd have for those contemplating a similar move.
Sure. Well, that was the answer to that question is sort of the genesis of the book, Liturgy of the Land, which is the co-author and myself, Tommy Van Horn. We both sort of made a move to the land, as they call it, at the same time. And I think actually having our friendship really buoyed each other up, because there are a lot of challenges that people don't recognize. And we've been homesteading pretty seriously since about 2012. And we've seen a lot of people come and go. So there's a high turnover and failure rate, but then those that sort of make it have a very contented and happy way of life. So we wrote the book as sort of what is the conversion and what are the many conversions necessary if you sort of have grown up in an urban or suburban setting or not. And to clarify, I guess I kind of was outside of a suburb, but in a rural community, a small southern town. And when you left my neighborhood, if you turned left, you went into Chapel Hill, in a university town in Durham and Raleigh and big city. If you turned right, you went to my hometown of Pittsboro, which is where my high school was and things like that. So it's kind of in the middle. But I did not grow up with any farming or anything, so to speak. I did grow up, however, my father was blue collar. So there's a lot of considerations we put in the book. Things that were an advantage to me were being able to know how to do manual labor, to know how to use tools, which is there's this presumption that anyone can just jump into manual labor or the use of tools or constructing it. They can just do it, and that people that have to use tools are less intelligent. But if you've ever seen someone who's never used a shovel, striking at the ground without any effect, so that was a huge advantage. The challenges are, I mean, they're laid out really in that book, is that our mind, we don't know how our mindsets are formed, how our habits are formed. And we are so saturated in kind of the industrial, technological, mass culture world. Mass culture meaning, a lack of local culture, like just kind of this mass homogenized pop culture, pop politics, pop everything. We don't realize how much we breathe that air all around us. So the conversions in the book we talk about is just one up front is, what is what is an economy? What does economy mean? What does it mean? The fundamental difference between a homestead and a suburbia. What is it? And it's, well, in suburbia, you leave to make your money and you come home to consume it, or you leave for productivity, formation. You leave for everything, and you come home. So your home becomes primarily a place of entertainment and consumption. No production. And that might seem like a subtle thing, but in the United States in the 1800s, 90% of households would have been agrarian households. And then the remaining 10% would have likely been engaged in some sort of home-based, or not 10%, maybe at least another 8% home-based work. Even just the work of the household itself, with just a kitchen garden and the cooking, and but even taking care of the aged and the infirm and the sick and children. These things happen in the home, so that the home was a meaningful center of productivity and work, whereas the suburbia is not. So transforming your home into a place of work and productivity is probably harder than most people realize, if we're saturated in the suburban economic model. So I don't know what, you're interested, whether you're trying to live with the seasons instead of, just time clocks, or having a natural economy versus artificial economy, or learning to work with your neighbors instead of just like waving at them when you take the trash out. There's a lot of changes, and I just think that realizing that it is a cultural. So if I was going to summarize it, it is a cultural conversion that is necessary if you're really going to live life from the land, and that there's going to be a big spectrum of where people can actually land on that. Economic practicalities, debt, all that kind of stuff. But thinking about it not as just a skill, presuming you can do, but really a conversion of your way of life. If you can get that mindset and you're prepared to be converted, it might go better.
Yeah. Did you notice as you made the move that your worldview, could you notice your worldview changing the more you immersed yourself in a more agricultural life?
Well, I do know there is a subtle change. I mean, our world now is dominated by artificial economy. So this is what Aquinas and Aristotle called a money-based economy, right? Where you sort of everything is translated into monetary value, and that is how we measure the success of something. So, in the US, the economy is measured by GDP, right? Just how much money are we churning? I think there's more and more in my life, there's a profound realization that when God said, you cannot serve God and mammon. Sorry, when our Lord said, you cannot serve God and mammon, or as the Ronald Knox translation puts it, you must serve God or mammon. That I think having some touch with the way nature, creation itself works, changes how you think about the world. Whereas and this is one of the chapters, is that, the sense we get when our entire worldview, or our entire view of the world, I should say, is that there is a scarcity within creation, there is a scarcity within life, and you have to fight to make sure you get your share of it. And that attitude can come from the left or the right and be the same attitude, which is that the earth is fundamentally scarce. Those that have more have it because they deserve it through their fight, or they've seized it by their might, whatever your view is. Whereas the abundance of creation itself is actually overwhelming, where you don't have to deplete and destroy things in order to, the way we think about, well, I'm happy to destroy this piece of land over here so that this piece of land can benefit. Or, when it comes to like the stock market, I mean, for someone to win, someone has to lose in the stock. That's just how buying and selling works. It cannot go on infinitely and everyone become successful. It's just a lot of people can. Whereas the fruitful abundance, and I'm not proposing here some massive. I don't have the I don't know, the educational whatever. I don't have it in me to say this is therefore what everything. I understand these things are nuanced and big, difficult questions, but then at the same time they're not. When you work with creation and you work with the way God ordered nature, it's an amazing, overwhelming abundance where when God says to Adam, you can till and keep the garden, you can work and bring everything within your work to greater perfection and greater fruitfulness and damage nothing or do violence to nothing. That's actually when God said that to Adam, it's possible. Our work and on the homestead, I'm able, in the broad economy, I don't sense that because I don't think we're not built around those presuppositions. But, we were last night, I was sitting down with Daniel, one of my sons, and we are harvesting radish seeds, which is kind of a silly thing because radish seeds are super cheap, but we had a whole bed of these daikon radishes go to seed. And one radish had this giant stalk, and off the stalk had these giant branches, and each branch was just covered in these seed pods. And each seed pod had about, like 7 or 8 seeds in it. So just one radish plant, the abundance of that radish plant was overwhelming where we wouldn't even know what to do. If we propagated all these things, we would be just swimming in radishes, which we don't want to swim in radishes. But I think that is the worldview of, sorry for that long answer, that God is good, that his creation is not deficient in its ability to take care of us. And that by actually working with nature, loving people and like giving away the abundance and being generous, that actually is what he intended. And it is possible. I think it's a delusion. It's a deficit of our imagination to think, no, the only way is for some people to have and some people to not. Now, there's a huge, I know that opens up all sorts of issues of economics, I know, but that's been the biggest thing for me is the fruitfulness of creation.
Yeah. Yeah, unlike people who are doomsaying and saying the world's going to run out of resources, well, maybe if it's the way we run it presently, but it was never designed to be overpopulated.
Yeah.
And if God had his way,
and that's why it's related. It's always, I'm sorry, they continue to tell that lie and to make these, the amount of times that the doomsdayers have been wrong about abundance of the earth. And this is why it's also related to the anti-life, anti-children, anti-fertility movements, is that they do not see an abundance of man as an abundance of good things, right? And then, but when they show us pictures of why that's bad, they don't show an ordered society or an agrarian society. They show these slums and places of great disorder, which I would agree are disordered, but that means they're disordered, right? When things are in order, they are fruitful. And we can have confidence in God's ability to have a creation that's fruitful and not necessarily depleting of something. But this is why the strange bedfellows of, anti-life, anti-fertility, and doomsday is why they're related.
Yeah. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about your farm, how many cows you have, the kind of jobs that occupy you, how you involve your kids in the daily activities, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, we have a farm that's mostly a mess with a lot of unfinished projects and broken fences and piles that need to be moved around. But that it is a way of life. We're never done. Our farm is mostly ordered around our small dairy herd. And the reason that is you talk about fruitfulness, these animals, we can rotate them around our property, our neighbor's property, multiple neighbors' properties. We can, and they go and harvest grass by grazing the grass. And by the way, grass wants to be grazed. It actually grows, differently from a tree. It's from the bottom up. So they grow this, and it's everywhere. We're surrounded by it. We can't eat it, but a cow can eat it and turn it into milk and more cows. And so the abundance of the dairy for us is just makes so much sense. We can send them out to harvest something that we can't eat. They bring it home and turn it into milk, more beef, and manure for the garden. So our life kind of revolves around these dairy cows. And because of them, we're 100% self-sufficient on dairy and meat, because even the waste from the dairy goes to pigs, right? So we can raise pigs for our family. As far as the work there, then that morning and evening, we're not like planting crops and toiling over crops and having harvest season. We sort of, because I have a full-time job, we and they school during the day. The dairy works really well for us. And morning and evening, we come together for work and prayer. Basically, is what we do. And the older, so this morning, my oldest son, he goes out and he moves the cow's paddock, right, which is where they're going to graze for the day. He's moving that. With the next son down, I'm milking with him in the barn, and then the two younger sons under them are feeding the bottles to the calves, and then there's a couple in the middle that are doing some of our we raise meat chickens and laying hens for eggs. And then my daughter is out. She's very industrious. She's raising a herd of pigs actually for another farm on our farm. But don't worry, I think I'm getting a decent deal on it. So, we go out, and those things kind of send us out of the home, but they're bringing us together, that shared work. And that's one of the analogies I like to use, is that is the effect of the homestead is a centripetal force, meaning a pulling inward is what that work does. It pulls us together as a family. And that's in contrast to, I think, the world today. The more kids you have, the busier you get, the more you're doing. It has a centrifugal force that sort of, the better you are at things of the world, the more likely you'll be pulled away from your family. So if you're really good at your work, a lot of times that'll actually pull you away more. Or if you're really good at sports even or something, it'll pull you away from the home. So it's, in a sense, if the better we are, the farther from the household we'll get. Whereas the productivity of a household just brings you together in that shared work, which we do because of the dairy is our main thing, just twice a day, every day. That's our rhythm all year, every day, Christmas and Easter.
So I believe your kids are homeschooled. You have 8 of them. What are its challenges? What are its advantages? And what role do you see as fathers having in homeschooling?
Do you mean specific to just homeschooling generally, or even life on a homestead?
Oh, well, I suppose in your own context. So yeah, your personal experience.
Right. Well, I guess I could state the concern I have with the homeschooling movement, which is good. I mean, I think it's a very good reaction to the problems we see in maybe the public school, but it's also another pro is that it makes your house instantly productive, right? Your homeschooling is a way that refunctionalizes the home, so the home becomes a meaningful place, right, that the family gathers instead of just a place where we eat, sleep, and maybe watch a Netflix movie together. The downside is that I think particularly for boys, as they get older, the homeschool world can be dominated by mothers. And that makes a lot of sense when they're younger. But as they get older, it's amazing how little fathers are engaged in homeschooling. And there's an understandable part of this is that, the mom's been doing it. Say the kid's 12. She's been doing it for 6 years, whenever they started. She's been doing it the whole time. You kind of get into this habit, and there's not a clear time when, like our Lord in the temple, separates from his mother and is found in his father's house about, wanting to be about his business. So sometimes when homeschooling, there's not a good way to integrate into the life of the father for boys. The father doesn't have a work that he can easily share with his boys. And then the boys don't have a clear path of initiation, so to speak, to reach him and reach the world of men, so they can stay in the world of the mothers for way too long. That can be a big problem. So I do like on our farm, I found it as my sons get older, especially, that them having the farm having a place, and it is very much, we call it farm schooling. I mean, you are in formation when you are working with the land and creation and propagation and animals and husbandry and livestock and chainsaws and all that. You're learning all sorts of things, but also the time with me and the time being able to be around them. And that's a blessing not everyone can imitate, because I work from home, so I'm able to that's a huge blessing, to be able to be close there. But I think that's one of the bigger challenges for boys, particularly, is my work with the apostolate called Fraternis, which is my main job. We get daily communications from moms or little Johnny's 12 and 13. He's not around it. What do I do? And really boys need to be around men and mentors and fathers, and they don't get to do that a lot. So that for us, that's my being able to work with my sons and seeing them, whereas it feels like in adolescence in today's world, fathers and sons drift apart, and they get a tension and they kind of drift. And there is some natural, vying for alpha male, worldly thing. But I also think the world just pulls us apart at a time when we really need to be coming together, which in traditional societies, the sons would have been coming into the world of the father, not departing from it, right, as he enters into manhood. So I do love that about the farm and the homeschool, because if they were out in, their life would slowly be farther away, and I would have to enter their world or force them into my world by great effort versus sort of the natural integration that happens in the home and on the homestead.
Yeah. You've put a lot of effort into helping fathers and sons, and primarily through Fraternis, which you just mentioned before, in the hope that more boys will grow into spiritual and emotional maturity. What inspired you to do this kind of work in the first place?
Oh, I mean, my own deficit, maybe my own imperfections. I'm a convert. Originally converted from nothing to Protestant Christianity, and a very zealous evangelical, strain. And we were very much, zealous to find those that were lost and share the gospel with them. It was really beautiful and simple, and we did it. And we were out there, and I saw conversions and the joy of people when they open up to God. But then eventually discovering the truth of the church, becoming Catholic, not finding that in the Catholic world. So I did get involved with youth ministry, but that was somewhat disaffecting, because if people were honest about how much effort it takes to do what we call Catholic youth ministry versus its impact, it's very low return. I mean, it's very ineffective. And that this is not, people can get a little twitchy about that, because we're not critiquing people that are trying really hard and doing really great work and seeing fruit and seeing conversions. But as a strategy, it's an utter failure. I mean, if we look broadly, and again, not trying to be just looking at the data, this is, don't shoot the messenger. Whereas the lines, what really matters is not whether someone attends a youth group or not. What really matters, statistically at least, is whether or not they have a strong family foundation and whether or not they integrate within their community, i.e. with the adults. So along that intellectual awakening, just seeing the sheer fact, Fraternis started, hey, look at all these boys leaving the church. Let's work hard and have programs so that they don't leave the church. And it wasn't long before working with the boys, you realize the boys aren't the problem. The men are the problem. And then you start working with the men and you realize, wow, all of us as men, we are poorly formed, poorly catechized, isolated from one another, mired in sin, and our own fraternity amongst ourselves is what matters first, ironically. So if you want to do good youth ministry, get the men to be brothers. And that's the challenge and sort of the direction of Fraternis, is that if you want to stop the hemorrhaging of young men from the church, then the men have to be men, meaning fully who they are. They need to be, good sons of God, good sons of the church, good brothers to one another, and then good fathers within their community, reaching the fatherless, forming the men, uniting for the common cause amongst the men. That's who forms the men, is the older guys, those mentors. So Fraternis was just, it has been both an experience, but also I went to graduate school while I was working for fraternists, just studying, what happened to men. And this is related to the whole of my agrarian interests, is that really men have not recovered from the Industrial Revolution. Meaning the initiation, the rites of passage that we had, the formation that we had when we had shared work together as men, as fathers, as sons, in our community, when the fathers were all sort of brought into the factories and into the cities, we really haven't recovered a good formative means to fight against the world. So we really haven't. I mean, there's just so that's part of why we're farming. I'm not saying that's the only way. It's just the way readily at my use. But Fraternus has more places in suburban and urban settings because it gives a place of intentional male formation from men to boys, instead of some curriculum or programs shoveled into a co-ed environment on a Sunday night with that's just not really working.
Yeah. Is Fraternus in one particular area in the States, or are there different chapters around for people who are curious?
Yeah, there's chapters. We have a predominance in the South, but we're in, I think, every region of the U.S. The chapters are very slow to grow because the formula is simple but demanding, which is a group of men that trust one another, which is often not present, a parish and clergy that will support and be there for them, and then a place to meet. You'd be amazed at how hard it is for those ingredients. We will be launching this year, or in 25, a way for smaller groups of fathers that don't have the parish infrastructure to start a chapter, to get started. Yeah, so sign up to the newsletter. You'll get news of that. But no, they're around. We had a chapter in New Zealand once for a while, but that was hard to support and get started. I'm not sure how that all wound up, but I haven't heard from them in a long time, so I don't think they're there.
Well, if anyone's in New Zealand, can restart it. Yeah, right. Reach out. Let's see how. So you've observed that if a boy isn't initiated into manhood, he gets stuck in a kind of perpetual adolescence. What can fathers and mothers do to ensure this transition takes place?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to be really careful to not try to propose myself as an expert that has the formula and the solution for this. But what I can provide, just from historical study, because in your local particular place, it's going to look different. But in the broad study, I'm fascinated with the anthropology of initiation. Like, how does it work? Because, for example, the church initiates people, right? We have the sacraments of initiation. Militaries initiate people. You can't just walk into I'm in the army now, right? Just like you can't walk in the church. I'm a Christian now. Even if you have a personal conversion, you still have to go, be baptized and confirmed and receive communion. So I'm fascinated with how initiation occurs, and that's the main proposal. And in your question, underlying it is that boyhood and manhood are different things, and that the transition from one to the other does not happen organically and naturally. That actually requires a sort of intervention. And that was most well articulated, although incomplete, but articulated by a sociologist named Arnold von Gennep, who studied this, and it kind of in the modern era, but looking at how do tribes, religious orders, militaries, villages, how do people initiate people? And he actually wrote a book called Rites of Passage, which was not just about boys becoming men. That's just the one actually that is the most universally present, is the fact that healthy societies know you cannot let boys just be boys. They have to become men, and that you have to do that to them, so to speak. In those stages, he recognized is a boy must be severed from his boyhood in some way. He has to leave that boyhood behind, which is the title of my book about that, which is an attempt to bring a Catholic anthropology to this, and really a theology to what's happening in this process. But he has to be separated from his boyhood, which largely has to do with being separated from the direct care and sort of integration in the life of the mothers. He has to be removed from that. He has to go through some sort of instruction or testing or encounter that marks sort of the change of things. and then he has to be integrated into a brotherhood and world of men. So he's got to, leave his childhood behind, go through some experience that marks that something's different, and then be a part of a brotherhood. So you can't just say, hey, go out and have adventures, because then, well, where's the brotherhood he's joining? Where's the common cause of men that he's fighting with? That's a necessary part. So, and we all know these stages, right? So an initiation of marriage, right? You're married. So those three stages Von Gennep identified are present in marriage. For this reason, a man must leave his father and mother. He must be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, right? In corpus, brought into a body. So most rites of passage, when you look at them, it's an individual leaving his life behind so that he can form and be a part of a new body, right? Whether it's he leaves home to join the military, he leaves home to join a religious order, or he leaves home to join his wife. For this reason, a man must leave, be severed from his old way of life, be joined, marriage ceremony, which sort of marks the changing of the new life, and then brought into in corpus, incorporated into that new body. The same is true. The sacraments of initiation, you die in baptism, you're given the mark of the new man in confirmation, and then you become incorporated fully when you become fully part of the body of Christ in Holy Communion. So with boys, it's just kind of this switching almost from the world of children and predominantly motherhood. It doesn't mean he's severing totally from his mother or disrespecting her, but it does mean he's changing his sphere of where he exists from mother to father.
Yeah. In a number of tribal cultures, the rite of passage tends to be somewhat violent. There's some kind of drawing of blood. So whether it's like a circumcision, or whether it's a scarification, or whether it's going and hunting an animal and having, killing a lion or something.
Yeah, knocking a tooth out. Yep.
Yeah, and I guess in the Catholic Church, the sacraments are not as intense, let's say. But what I would be interested in your thoughts on full immersion baptism, for instance, because if you get dunked in cold water, that's a real moment.
Yeah, at least it's a little
Whereas
uncomfortable.
we kind of sprinkle a bit of water on the forehead of babies. Yes. What do you think about that? Do you think the Catholic Church should kind of intensify its ceremonies a little bit, or?
Well, I would say we need to re-intensify the asceticism that is native and natural to the church. In times past, I mean, for example, if the laws around fasting, if you fasted all of Lent, which by the way, Lent used to be the whole, not just Wednesdays and Fridays or something, but all of Lent. If you added in rogation days and ember days and the fast around different feasts, there was between 40 and 50 days of not eating food, right? They were intense, and it was much less negotiation of, 2 half meals plus not a whole meal equals fasting. It's just Christians fasted. I mean, we fasted hard. And what is interesting is that there was many exemptions to this: students, nursing mothers, children. So, who was never exempted from Christian asceticism was men, working men that had. So I think the life, and this would have kicked in around, in adolescence for young men. I think the intense asceticism and the rigor of kneeling and fasting and penance and discipline that you see in rigorous religious orders, and which, by the way, the West was built by the monks, and the monks did not live an easy life. To enter into a monastic life was to enter into a sort of perpetual boot camp with the occasional Easter reprieve. But our faith is rigorous. It does have and I think actually the theology and the spirituality of the cross, when you give young men a challenge like that, you send them on a difficult pilgrimage, or that's what they want. If you're merely spiritualizing everything about the faith, meaning de-incarnating it, and just making it about enthusiasm for Jesus, is lacking in the manly, robust religion that is our religion. So we're sort of hiding a whole part of it. Whether full immersion or a good bringing back, I think the ceremonial analogy of when people were confirmed, they used to get a good slap on the cheek. There are remnants of and we have to remember our sacraments and our Lent is tied to initiation, because it was the early church, especially as the persecutions ended, that really ramped up Lent for the sake of new converts. That if you want to be one of us, you have to go through this serious difficulty, public scrutiny, and difficult fasts in order to join. There was this boot camp, which we still have, right? I mean, we still have Lent. It's just we're negotiating how many chocolates is too many, instead of the robust and manly. In fact, someone pointed out to me that in the Middle Ages, Catholic men would make fun of Muslims because their Ramadan, they didn't fast the whole time. They just fasted during the day and then ate and partied at night.
Yeah, cheating.
And they were like, that's not real fasting.
Wake up before sunrise, right?
Yeah.
To eat a lot, and so basically it's a 12-hour fast, and then a feast. Yeah.
And Catholic men would say, "What is that? Come on, let me show you how to fast."
Yeah. I'm friends with a Greek Orthodox abbot, and they have a 3-day period where they try and go without food and water. I mean, they're allowed to break it, but they aim high.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Eastern churches have not had the same. I mean, they have a very manly faith. I mean, even if you go to the divine liturgies of the East with their baritone singing and their beards, and I have a friend who's an Eastern Catholic priest, and he said, you come to some of our liturgies, like the liturgy of the pre-sanctified. I think it's during Lent or beginning of Lent. It's a workout, man. It's hard. All these prostrations and fasting, and they'll skip dairy for all sorts of time, so they live it there in the East. I think they have a very strong, more, in some ways, more attractive expression of the faith for a lot of young men.
So the popularity of Jordan Peterson seems to be driven in large part by young men looking for a male role model. You also have young men gravitating towards the likes of Andrew Tate and others, even in the Catholic space. And it strikes me that these latter figures are just as insecure as their audiences are, that they're using their machismo to hide it, however. So I was wondering what your take is on that situation. Do you see this kind of hypermasculinity as a bit of a mask?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I'm not sure if Jordan Peterson is always machismo. I don't know. And Adam Tate,
I'm not talking about Jordan. I'm just talking about Tate and others.
Okay. Is he one of these like chest thumping workout? I'm an alpha male guys. I don't even know.
Andrew Tate.
Yes.
Yeah, and mistreating women in particular. And then you have a strand within the Catholic scene, which is like wives submit, but it's basically a master-slave relationship.
Right. Yeah. Or I think it's worse. It's boss and bossed. I will have an article published soon about how silly some of, especially in the attitudes towards the wives, where it's a strange and it's because of our economic makeup that basically the home is divided between the guy who pays for it and the woman that keeps it clean. Whereas traditional societies would have had a much more beautiful integrated negotiation between husbandry and housewifery. Not to say that you lose the hierarchy of the family, or that the father is not the head. The father is absolutely the head of the home, but it's the head of a body that exists as a living body, not just boss and bossed. So, I mean, look at the perfect wife in Scripture is the Proverbs 31, right? Wife, right? And she's out buying fields and having them planted. So she is an economic force in the household. So there's more to that. But the insecurity, so my proposal on the book, or the way we articulate it, is as a boy is inherently insecure, right? Because he's actually insecure. He's physically unable to ward off danger and provide for himself. He is an insecure liability, right? And as he gets older, part of the point of initiation is actually to secure him in who he is and his identity. And I agree. It seems as if there are two spectrums, or there's two extremes on the spectrum here. There is we could call it the brat and the bully, or I've heard people call the brute. Maybe it's the brat and the brute, or it's the guy. It's either someone who the insecurity can manifest itself either in the sort of more pitiable insecurity of a passive person who refuses to engage in any sort of strength or leadership, and he's just kind of going along with the flow, and he just feels defeated everywhere he goes, keeps his head down, right? That kind of the wimp. That's it. Wimps and barbarians. Some call it wimps and barbarians. So he's the wimp, right? He's never been acquainted with his own strength. He has no idea what it's like to feel a healthy sort of dominion over something, not dominance, dominion. He just doesn't know how to act as a man, really. And then you have the other side, the other extreme, and these are present in Aquinas as well. He would call that the effeminate man. St. Thomas Aquinas, the effeminacy is not acting like a girl. Effeminacy means being unable and unwilling to sacrifice for others. So it's a form of insecurity. And then there's the brute, right? The guy who can't enter a room without declaring himself alpha to everyone around. And why does he have to do that? Why does he have to make? Obviously, it's insecurity. I mean, it's sort of this laughable need to constantly maintain the dominant position everywhere he is, because he doesn't have true dominion. Because true dominion for the Catholic, what is it? Is dominion over the self, right? It's this, and the self-mastery and the maturity of virtue. That's true dominion. And when virtue is present, it is able to bring order and justice and goodness and even beauty to its surroundings. It doesn't just rely on this just pure assertion, right? Because again, this goes back to the whole, what is the order of creation? Is it that some people have to dominate over others? Now, in the Catholic view, we would say, yeah, some people do have dominion over others the way a father does, right? So we understand the exercise of power always in a fatherly way. And so legitimate authority has a fatherly sense to it, which is a sacrificial, life-giving, Christ-like dominion. But yeah, those are just, the insecurity is, I think, if you don't go through an initiation in a time of securing experience and mentoring and affirmation, then you're going to keep looking for it, and you might, and even the passive guy, he's looking for it because he wants the tacit approval of probably women in his life, and he's, debilitated if they don't approve of him, and he just presumes all men are, mean, and he stays away from the company of men. Or there's the guy who goes around like the gang member, he's just got to be dominating wherever he goes, or he's going to slip and fall into, maybe he'll be like one of those wimpy guys. But it's all laughable. This is why it is only Catholic society that created the gentleman, right? We are the one capable of strength, of defense, of even of physical encounter, the chivalry, but also his goal is service and peace and tranquility, and the tranquility of order and joy, not living in, these guys that live in, it's like Vikings, their heaven is Valhalla, right? Their heaven is an endless war. And these guys can live in sort of the high of the war without ever reaching the goal of war, as St. Augustine would say, which is peace, right? They're unable to be peaceful, which is why we have the ideal of the gentleman, right? I might be capable of much, but my goal in every situation is to as St. John Henry Newman said, to cause harm to no one whenever possible.
You say a lot about the need for boys to be kind of called out or called up into manhood by other men. But Peterson, he makes a good point that says that guys can grow in their own maturity if they face small dragons on their own terms. So, for instance, if you don't like making phone calls, you prefer to text, well, make some phone calls. Decide to do it and do it. Or if you can't swim, well, don't go to a party and be found out. Go and learn. Go and enroll in swimming lessons. Overcome these small fears.
Well, I think I would categorize what he's talking about in that instance is the other form of security, or the way security comes about, is competency, right? Being able to do something is part of an initiation. If in other words, initiation is not information. It's not like, hey, you're a man now. Congratulations. Here's your ribbon. You actually gain, and everyone has those examples you just gave are great examples. When you're standing at the edge of a pool, you're insecure. When you swim across the pool, you have gained the competency of swimming. And now, when you stand at the edge of a pool, you are no longer as insecure. Right? Maybe, an ocean might be a different thing. Everything, I mean, from the first time you start walking down steps as a toddler, you're sort of always facing these battles. And I agree with him. I don't know that particular talk or book, but if you never encounter these things and you're never acquainted with your own abilities, then you're going to be insecure. And that's why I can't remember who it is. I think it's the Dirty Jobs guy. There's a show called Dirty Jobs, popular in the United States. But he says there's no such thing as self-esteem. There's only competency. We tend to think of self-esteem as information we give people to tell them they are special. But I think what they really want is actual. When a boy, like when my sons learn how to do something, and I can pat them on the back, I don't have to manufacture the feeling of being special because they've actually experienced their own capability and competency. Now, I would distinguish, though, the need for men to pull them up and affirm them is a different thing altogether, because we all have the need to hear, so to speak, you are my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. The longing of a boy for the affirmative love of the father is a different aspect. And the competency can very often provide the place where the father can say that, right? Where he can offer his praise, which is legitimate. Like, you did do that. I am impressed with you. But in our society, we have so few places where the father is guiding them into that. Because again, it's not just that they go and find their own battles. I mean, that's just kind of a matter of consuming in some ways. Like, I'm just going to go find some things to be good at and get good at them, versus entering in the way of life and being guided by a father. So I think the broader idea of course, all the little things, but like initiation. If I want to be part of a military, I'm not going to go in and tell them what skills I would like to learn on my way to being. So I submit to them telling me what I need to learn for the battle. And I think a father's job is always going to have something about, I am going to prepare you for life as a man, as your father, which means I'm not just going to teach you stuff. Other men are going to teach you all kinds of things. There's certain things I'm going to teach you, and that provides that teaching, and that provides me the opportunity to sort of build that relationship through that thing we're learning. Not that I'm basing my love for you on your ability to achieve, but that I know you want to achieve these. I'm going to show you how. I'm here to teach you this. So even our Lord says, my Father is at work. I must be about his business. I must go be about, he's been working from the beginning, and I must join him in that. I mean, there's this joining of the Father in his mission and his work that is a part of, that is separate from just mere competency and the security that comes from learning how to do things.
Yeah. Yeah, we need some more St. Paul's, because when you read in his epistles, he clearly has that role. He talks about begetting people in the faith. He sees himself very much as a father, and he writes out of concern for his children and says, I gave you milk, but then you need meat. So he's all about lifting them up, introducing them into the mysteries as their faith deepens, all those kind of things. But yeah. It's a bit more of a sorry situation nowadays, because you've noted that modern Catholicism is largely off-putting to men in some of your writing. And I was hoping you could expand on this and suggest some steps by which men might be drawn back to Mass.
Yes, I don't think men, well, we have to acknowledge some hard truths. Not only is there plenty of scandal with the clergy that men find off-putting, and there's scandal with men too. I mean, we know that sexual sins are overwhelming across society, but the ability of many clergy, say you go from just a homeschool to a seminary to or to college, and then to seminary, and then to the priesthood, and then to your local parish, a lot of priests have never just been in the world of men to where they speak to them in ways that, and I think some of those clergy who haven't experienced that, they would dismiss what I'm saying immediately. So, well, that's just machismo nonsense. I say, no, absolutely not. I remember we had a tragedy in the U.S. where a woman was killed for failing to perform a act on a man in a Catholic bookstore, and he shot her. And when I first heard that, my thought as a husband was of Maria, and a father was Maria Goretti, right? Of refusing the advances of a man towards impurity, and he killing her. And I thought, wow, we have a Maria Goretti. And then I thought of justice, that as a father, I wanted to know, as a husband, I would be, my wife was heroic, and then that this man was brought to justice. And the official pronouncement from the Conference of Catholic Bishops, this is not, I'm trying not to wade into, unnecessarily controversial things, but I don't think this is that controversial. This is part of the problem. His first public declaration was against gun violence. And in that instance, whatever he thought should be done about gun violence, he did not appeal to me or seem to me to be a man who has concern for his bride. And he has a bride, the church, and that those were his first thoughts were so strange to me. And I despaired. I mean, hopefully not the sin of despair, but I remember despairing at that. That was this guy's first thought. And how very often I don't think clergy and the episcopacy are even talking to men and understanding their challenges and their dispositions. And I think it's partly because sometimes the funnel and trajectory towards ordination is lacking in initiation. I mean, and then the other downs is that the church, people say, well, the church is run by men. Anyone who knows, who works in and around an average Catholic parish, is that the church is not run. Church is a place of women and children. The people that dominate, there 80% of catechists in the United States are women. School teachers are women. There's not a lot of men around. So that when boys are coming up in the faith, they perceive, I think rightly, that the church is a place for women and children, and then clergy that they don't relate to. So where do they go? They don't feel at home. And people will wrongly dismiss this observation as, well, you just want a more machismo, chest-thumping Christianity. It's like, absolutely not. You read the spiritual classics of the Imitation of Christ, the Dom Scupoli's Spiritual Combat, Francis de Sales' Introduction to Devout Life. The rigor of truth and devotion to Christ is very manly. St. Paul's faith is a manly, heroic, sacrificial faith. The faith that is proposed to men now is, the joke is, in the United States, milquetoast. It's pleasantries. It's political activism. It's there's no war against. So it's actually the first error is it's not helping them overcome their enemy, which is sin. It very rarely even identifies the enemy clearly as sin. And then it doesn't introduce to them the means to overcome that sin, which is prayer and grace and asceticism and the sacraments. It becomes just a bland place where people, if we're nice enough, we're going to nice the world into the church. And that bland, milquetoast, homogenized, everyone be nice faith. Well, first of all, it's not Catholicism. It's something else. And it's certainly not attractive to men. Men are willing, and it's not we're not theming or branding Catholicism here. I remember being on a trip with a bunch of young men that were being just utter, total jerks, self-absorbed boys, and then someone hurt themselves. A young woman hurt herself, and she couldn't get up the mountain. So they made this bed that they could carry and carried her up to the top of the mountain. And they were once they had a shared mission and something that was hard, they were in. When are we proposing that to young men? We're just not proposing it in the way that we propose the faith. And I know I probably just opened up saying, well, there's no one in the church that's really speaking to an understanding man. And it's very often true. I don't want to propose too many solutions to that. But just say that's an observation of the real makeup of the church of being women and children, and then the inability of clergy to communicate. And I'm very much for a celibate clergy. As a family man, I have some friends that are married priests. Like, ooh, that's a difficult life. There's a good reason for celibacy and being like St. Paul. But even, sometimes there's just a disconnect that is intensified if those priests in their formation do not learn explicitly and are formed in how to reach men, not just as, deficient females.
Sticking with the church for a bit, you've said that we don't live in a time when the church's teachings are rejected. We're living in a time when no one knows what they are. And I was thinking, well, this signals a move from a post-Christian to a pre-Christian situation. We're becoming pagan again. Would you say this presents us with an opportunity in the sense that young people are able to encounter the gospel not as something stale, but as something fresh and life-giving?
Yeah, I think in the church, you've seen that. And sadly, I think a lot of the leadership has misdiagnosed the phenomenon of like very rigorous traditional Catholics, young Catholics that are very traditional in their faith and very serious in their asceticism and prayer. Sometimes we've wrongly, what they're looking for is the rigor and not just the novelty of the traditional faith, but the solid ground of it is just so firm. And I don't think people say, well, that's just a false nostalgic and firm. No, it's just not. It just isn't. It's something different. Young men will get reprimanded for becoming very zealous for the liturgy, for example. Like if you give, seminarians or young men can be famous for being, liturgical Nazis, and they get criticized for this. And I actually think that's wrong. Give them say, yes, do this and do this well. Of course, teach them charity and gentleness. I mean, that just goes without saying. But so I think there is an opportunity in how many young Catholics are, especially in the United States, are disaffected with sort of the broad, bland, evangelical or mainline Protestant worlds, whereas the ancient faiths, of Orthodoxy and traditional Catholicism are on the rise. As far as the opportunity, I might be a little. I think it's harder than we think because, C.S. Lewis said reconciling a post-Christian to Christ is like reconciling a divorced marriage. That sometimes the decision in their mind seems so final. But when I have had the opportunity, and I'm a convert, right? So I'm coming from feeling the joy of the gospel, the initial conversion to Christ, but also the beauty of the church. It's always been confusing to me that sort of the modern bland, like this embarrassment over our own doctrine, our own history is strange to me. And so we don't teach it. The lack of formation is awful. And I can't relate to it because I just didn't grow up. People say, well, I just wasn't formed in my parish, or I don't even know what that looks like because I wasn't there. But I presume it means just bad teaching, bad catechesis, a lack of leadership from, parents and clergy, and a weird professionalization of catechesis that didn't work. The catechetical industrial complex has failed. And every metric we have has failed. Whether that provides an opportunity to recover them, I don't know. But as I was saying, I have, when you can really ask people the question of what they've rejected, you realize they haven't rejected a clear presentation of the gospel at all. And if you can get in there and have a conversation, there is fruitfulness, but that requires the more work is really in the trustworthiness and of the relationship itself, of having the relationship with the person. Blasting it, I don't think blasting these things across the internet or Twitter I don't know. I'm not on Twitter or social media, but I don't think that goes well. But I do think Catholicism has such a firm footing and such a defensible answer to modern errors. When you just look at the modern world, we've progressed beyond. It's like, are we happier or are we not? By the year, unhappier. I mean, we're immeasurably unhappier every year. So if you're believing that we're going on some progressive model that's leading to human flourishing, I don't know what data you're looking at. I mean, we're well air conditioned and well fed, but we're miserable and killing ourselves at the same time. So, we're in what John Senior called the air conditioned Holocaust. If it provides a new opportunity for evangelization, it's still going to require our creative, imaginative work and, you know, our relationship. But the sad thing I feel like now, you know, I'm going to tiptoe around this, is there's still huge numbers in the leadership of the church that still seem embarrassed and bent on tweaking and liberalizing and sort of destabilizing things that are perfectly stable and don't need to be tinkered with. My frustration is that we're talking about everything but the real problems. And for that, I would point to a book, Mary Eberstadt's How the West Really Lost God. Excellent book. But she traces, I mean, when we lose the ecosystem and the stability of the family, we lose the faith. We did not lose the faith because we lost an argument to atheists. They don't have good enough arguments. We lost the faith because we lost the family. And that's what her data, her research, she's a sociologist, what she shows is when the family declines, the faith declines. But right now we're making peace. We being the leaders in the church are trying to make peace with the sexual revolution that destroyed us, that destroyed the family. We're trying to make peace and work around it when really we have the path to happiness, which is the truth. And that's being downplayed in our endless obsession with dialoguing, and oftentimes with enemies that will never reconcile with. They can't. You cannot reconcile these things. But people are still attempting to reconcile the truth with error instead of, you know, giving hungry people food. We're still arguing over truth and error in ways that will never. What will they lead to? Being more popular with the world? I mean, what are they going to lead to? The salvation of souls, stability of the family, the prominence of the church in society. Why are we doing this? Why aren't we rigorously taking the truth to those that are starving and dying, starving for it and dying from error?
Finishing on a couple of softer questions. Your favorite saint and why?
Oh, you know, you gave me that question. I should have thought ahead. Well, I do love St. Paul. I love St. Augustine. As much as I like how like the Apostle John seems to have never, he just was like him and Aquinas, they're, you know, steady, never seem to have fallen into sin. Obviously Augustine is so relatable. But my patron is St. Francis de Sales. And I think relating to this conversation we just had, you know, he lived in a time when there was great controversies around the Protestants. And one, he was zealous to correct their error. And then in his preaching, it was also a time when preachers wanted to be eloquent and use Greek and Latin constantly in their sermons, and the sort of artistry of the sermon was paramount, not its effectiveness. And he was criticized because he was preached so well to the common man. And given our conversation today, I think his zeal for the truth, and then his ability to reach the common man. I mean, his work, The Introduction to the Devout Life, is with us today because it is so eminently, annoyingly practical, and a call to, you know, the devoted life, which if you read it, it's a very serious life of prayer and asceticism. So I think he's still with us. And I mean, his example, and, you know, and he's a man, you know, the stories of him tying himself to a tree so that he wouldn't be eaten by wolves as he slept, you know, he's a manly saint, and his mastery over himself. There were stories that he would receive guests that he was so annoyed by that he would claw at his desk as he sat there smiling, and his desk had claw marks where he had to scratch across, but he mastered himself in that and won over souls in his zeal for that.
Finally, where can people go if they want to learn more about your work?
Well, I think the best thing would be, you know, we publish a magazine called Sword and Spade, which I don't think we ship to Australia. Maybe we could find a distributor or something there. But if you sign up, we can make digital copies. That's asking a lot of these kind of questions that we're talking about. We'd be happy to have them engage. Swordandspade.com or theswordandspade.com. And that'll keep you, if you were on there, you'll keep up with Fraternus and all the other things too.
Okay. Well, I'm friends with the guy that just distributes in your polity, so
all right.
help you out with some spade too.
Well, those are my friends. Tell them, yeah, I want in. I want on that truck.
Yeah. Also, just for plugging our own channel, tmc.org.au, if you want to find our website. Also, if you could like, share, and subscribe this content, that'll help us grow. Jason Craig from North Carolina, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, so I was wondering, what are its challenges? What are its I'll just start that question again.
Sure.
So, what are its challenges? What are its advantages? And what? For goodness sake, how can I not get this question out?